Salt air, fluorescent lights, a gate number I'd been repeating in my head since 500. I was standing at gate 14 holding a sign with a name on it, waiting for a man I had never met. My orders said pick up Rear Admiral Marcus Reyes and drive him to base housing. Simple, routine. The kind of assignment a junior logistics officer pulls 100 times a year. Then he walked off the jet bridge, and nothing about that morning stayed routine. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of posture the Navy carves into a man over 30 years. He shook my hand the way officers do, firm, brief, already moving past it. "Petty Officer Ellison," I said. "Dana Ellison. I'll be driving you to base housing, sir." His grip didn't loosen. His eyes dropped to my wrist for half a second, then came back up to my face, and something in his expression rearranged itself. "Ellison," he repeated quietly. "As in Elaine Ellison?" The question landed wrong. I hadn't said my mother's first name. I hadn't said anything about my mother at all. "Yes, sir. Elaine is my mother. How do you—" He didn't answer. He just stared at me the way you'd stare at a photograph that had somehow started breathing. I noticed the tattoo then, the same instant he noticed me noticing it. An anchor wrapped in rope, faded to the color of an old bruise, sitting just above his left wrist. My mother had that exact tattoo. Same anchor, same rope, same placement, like someone had traced it twice using a single stencil 30 years apart. I'd asked her about it once, when I was maybe 9, tracing the ink with my finger while she made dinner. She told me it meant she'd never let go of what mattered, even when the Navy tried to take it. She never explained further than that, and I stopped asking somewhere around 14, the way kids stop asking about things that make their parents go quiet. "Sir, are you all right?" He exhaled slowly, like a man setting down something heavy. "I need to ask you a strange question, Petty Officer. Okay, does your mother still talk about the Pacific?" My stomach dropped. Not because the question was frightening, because it was specific in a way that made no sense coming from a stranger. My mother had spent 6 months stationed near the Pacific decades ago before I existed, back when she still wore the uniform herself. She almost never mentioned it. Once, drunk on wine at my cousin's wedding, she'd said something about the year everything fell apart and then changed the subject so fast the table went silent. "She doesn't talk about it," I said carefully. "Why?" He looked down at my wrist again as if checking for a tattoo I didn't have. Then he looked away out toward the tarmac and said something that made the hair rise on my arms because I was there. And I think I know why she stopped talking about it. We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes. Norfolk traffic crawled past the windows, while I gripped the wheel and rehearsed a dozen questions. I was too disciplined to ask a flag officer I'd known for 11 minutes. It was Reyes who finally broke it, somewhere past the second exit. "Your mother and I served together," he said, "a long time before you were born. You knew her, not a question. A demand disguised as one. I loved her." He said it plainly, without ceremony, the way you'd report a fact in a briefing. "Before you ask, no, I'm not telling you this to complicate your life. I'm telling you because I think you're owed an explanation that's 30 years overdue." Something cold moved through my chest. I'd grown up believing my father was a stranger who left before I could remember his face. My mother never spoke badly of him. She only ever said he'd chosen a different life, and that had always been enough of an answer, right up until a Navy admiral sat in my passenger seat implying otherwise. "My father's name was David," I said. "David Ellison. He left when I was 2. Reyes went quiet in a way that felt deliberate, careful, the silence of a man deciding how much truth a person can absorb in one sitting. "What if I told you," he said finally, "that David Ellison never existed?" I nearly ran a red light. Parking garage, level 3, engine off. I turned to face him, both hands still on the wheel like I needed something to hold on to. "Explain that now." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather case, the kind officers use for medals, and inside it wasn't a medal at all. It was a photograph, edges soft with age, a young sailor with his arm around a young woman on a pier somewhere tropical. She had my jaw, my eyes, a face I'd looked at in mirrors my whole life. "That's my mother," I whispered. "That's us," Reyes said. "Before everything." I stared at the photograph until the parking garage seemed to dissolve around it. Before what? Before Captain Holt decided our relationship was a liability to his investigation, the name meant nothing to me yet. It would mean everything within the hour. Reyes explained it slowly, like a man diffusing something. He and my mother had been engaged quietly, the way sailors sometimes are when regulations frown on fraternization across rank. He'd been building a case against corruption in a fuel contract program. Officers skimming money meant for ship maintenance, funneling it through shell suppliers. His commanding officer at the time, Captain Elias Holt, had been one of the names on his list of suspects. Holt found out. Not about the investigation, about the engagement. And he used it. He told your mother I'd requested a transfer to get away from her, Reyes said. Told me she'd requested one to get away from me. Neither of us had said any such thing. He forged the paperwork himself. By the time either of us figured it out, I was in the Mediterranean and she was back stateside, and every letter either of us sent afterward mysteriously never arrived. My throat tightened around a question I already dreaded the answer to. Did she know she was pregnant when you left? I don't know, he said, and for the first time his composure cracked. I've spent 30 years not knowing that. The next morning I drove to my mother's house before my shift, still in uniform, coffee untouched in the cup holder. She opened the door already reading my face. Something's wrong, she said. Not a question. I met someone yesterday, I said. Admiral Marcus Reyes. Her hand found the doorframe like she needed it to stay standing. Where? The airport. I was assigned to drive him. I paused, watching her eyes. He has your tattoo, Mom, the anchor. Color drained from her face in a way I had never witnessed. Not once in 28 years. Not during my deployment. Not during her divorce. Not even during her surgery. She sat down at the kitchen table like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. He showed you that. He showed me a photograph too. I sat across from her. The two of you on a pier. Mom, who is David Ellison? Silence stretched long enough that I heard the refrigerator hum. Then quietly, there is no David Ellison. Ice moved through my chest. Then who's on my birth certificate? A name I made up, she said, because the truth was easier to bury than to explain to a child. She stood, walked to a hallway closet, and pulled down a shoebox from the top shelf, the kind of box that had clearly been moved from house to house, apartment to apartment, untouched for decades but never discarded. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied together with string that had gone brittle with age. Some were sealed and stamped "Return to Sender" in unfamiliar handwriting. Others had never been opened at all. I wrote him every week for 4 months, she said. I never got a single reply. Then Captain Holt visited me personally. Told me Marcus had requested reassignment, specifically to distance himself from our relationship. Told me he'd said, and I quote, that a child would ruin his career trajectory. Her voice cracked on the word career. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was Marcus's commanding officer. That's a lie. My hands were shaking now, matching hers. Reyes never said that. He didn't even know you were pregnant. I know that now. She pressed her palm flat against the table like she was trying to steady the whole room. I didn't know it then. I picked up one of the unopened letters. The handwriting on the front was unmistakably Reyes's. I'd seen his signature on my drive assignment paperwork the day before. Underneath the address, in a different hand entirely, someone had written a single instruction. Return. Do not forward. Someone intercepted your mail, I said. For months. For longer than that. My mother's eyes finally lifted to meet mine. Holt made sure of it on both ends. I found out years later he'd been doing the same thing to Marcus. Every letter I sent gone. Every letter he sent gone. 2 people who loved each other. And one man decided we didn't get to know it. Why? What did he gain from wrecking 2 lives? Because Marcus was getting close to something in that fuel contract investigation. Close enough to end Holt's career. Holt needed him distracted, angry, focused on anything except the numbers he was chasing. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Separating us wasn't cruelty for its own sake, Dana. It was strategy. We were just the collateral. I called Reyes that night from my apartment. Letters spread across my kitchen counter, like evidence at a crime scene, because that's exactly what they were. I found the letters, I said. All of them. Holt intercepted every single one, both directions. Silence on the line long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. I need to see them, he finally said. We met the next afternoon at a diner outside base. Him in civilian clothes for the first time since I'd known him. No rank insignia. No medals. Just an older man carrying 30 years of a lie he hadn't written, but had lived inside anyway. I laid the letters on the table between us. He read through 3 of them without speaking, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were wet. "Elaine wrote this," he said, tapping a page, "3 weeks before you were born. She's asking me to come home for the birth. You never got it. I never got any of them." He set the letter down like it might shatter. "I need to talk to Holt. We need to talk to Holt," I corrected. "Together." Captain Elias Holt was retired now, living in a modest house 2 counties over, and when he opened the door and saw Reyes standing beside a woman he'd clearly never met, but somehow recognized instantly. Something behind his eyes went very still. "Marcus," he said carefully, "it's been a long time." "You intercepted our letters," Reyes said, no preamble, no rank posturing. Just the plain accusation of a man who'd waited 3 decades to say it. For years. Both directions. Holt's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Not immediately, and not ever, really. He simply stopped pretending there was anything left to protect. "I was protecting the investigation," he said. "You were about to expose contracts that implicated 3 admirals above my pay grade. I couldn't have you distracted, and I couldn't have you angry enough to go public before we had everything documented. So you destroyed a family. I redirected some correspondence. Even now." Decades later, he reached for the softer word. "You stole a person," I said, stepping forward, my voice steadier than I expected. "Me. You stole 30 years of a father from his daughter, and you're calling it correspondence." He had nothing to offer that word after that. Not an excuse, not even a proper apology, just the silence of a man finally hearing out loud exactly what his convenience had cost 2 people who'd never done anything except love each other at the wrong moment, in the wrong chain of command. We didn't destroy him. Reyes documented everything and turned it over through proper Navy channels, and whatever consequences followed Holt afterward were handled by people whose job that actually was. That part never felt like victory to me. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for longer than you realized. What felt like victory happened 3 weeks later, on my mother's porch, watching Reyes hand her a cup of coffee like he'd been doing it every morning for 30 years instead of 0. Watching her roll up his sleeve to look at the anchor tattoo she hadn't seen since she was 26. Watching them not pretend the missing decades hadn't happened. Because pretending was never the point. The point was choosing what came next. Reyes never asked me to call him Dad. He didn't need to force a word that had to arrive on its own schedule. Months later, over dinner at his place, surrounded by a meal he'd clearly overcooked for 2 people, I said it anyway, quietly, testing how it felt in my mouth after 28 years of not having anyone to say it to. He didn't say anything back. He just looked down at the table, composed himself, and smiled in a way that told me everything words couldn't. I used to think justice meant watching the person who hurt you finally feel it too. I understand now that justice sometimes looks quieter than that. It looks like a lie finally losing its grip, and 2 people choosing to build something new out of what was left. The tattoo on my mother's wrist was never a promise that nothing would go wrong. It was a promise that no matter how far a lie traveled, the truth would eventually find its way home. If this story reminded you of someone you've misjudged, or a question you've been afraid to ask, maybe it's worth asking it. And if you believe the truth still matters, even 30 years late, share this with someone who needs to hear that.